So many buttons to push and knobs to turn and all that sort of stuff. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to First Baptist, and happy Mother's Day to all of you. We do have a surprise for the ladies when you leave this morning, so be sure to take advantage of that. I'll say more about that in a little bit. It's courtesy of Brenda Rogers, though, so you'll want to thank her for that. She just did a yeoman's work on those. You take a look. Yeah, we can give her a round of applause. That's fine. We're Baptists, so we can applaud in church. It's fine, so it's not a problem. So, yes, happy Mother's Day. One of the things that I realized a long time ago, and I remember growing up in church and Mother's Day, and it was basically about biological moms. In other words, mothers who had actually given birth to children. And that was something that seemed to be a fixture for many, many years. And that's fine. I mean, obviously, that's no easy task to conceive and give birth to a child and then raise it, of course, and all that sort of stuff. And that's a lot of work. But then I very quickly, as I reached young adulthood, I began to realize that the word mom has a very broad definition. Just because a woman is not a biological mom or was not a biological mom doesn't mean that she can't play a very important role in the lives of people. So it's very likely, very possible that there are some of you ladies here this morning that you've never had a biological child or biological children, but you've played the role of mom. You've played the role of mom to nieces, nephews. You've played the role of mom to a number of other folks. Maybe you are an older lady. Okay, I'll say that carefully. But maybe you're an older lady and there's some younger women that you have. I think about 1 Timothy and Titus where he says, Paul writes, that the older women sort of shepherd or have a relationship with the younger women, and likewise the older men with the younger men. My mom passed away this past March 23rd. It was 13 years. I cannot believe it's been that long since my mother has been gone. So you never knew me without when I had a mom. She's gone. My dad passed away. It'll be this September 8th. It'll be 10 years for him. It's amazing. And I've had the opportunity to have ladies be like a mom to me. One of my favorite moms, and I used to call her that, was TJ. Okay, TJ was a great mom. She was wonderful, and she would, occasionally she'd say, "Now, Pastor," and she'd give me some good advice and good correction, and that was very important. So please understand that this wish goes out to all of you ladies that have played that role in many, many ways, maybe even more than you yourselves realize. So we're thankful for all of you. We're thankful for the biological moms, but we're also thankful for any mom or grandmother who also plays a mentoring role in the lives of others. So we just want to thank you for that, and we want to keep that in mind. So we're continuing our series on a theology of suffering and what the Bible says about suffering. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes the idea of suffering, but we know that it is there, and there are a number of reasons why. One of them, for example, is the fact that we live in a fallen world, that sin has damaged that all of creation. Human beings are estranged from God, human beings estranged from each other in the fall, right? When God says to Adam, did you eat of the fruit that I told you not to eat of? And he says, well, the woman that you gave me, right? So he's blaming his wife, but he's really blaming God, right? The woman that you gave me, right? And then he, confronts Eve and then also the serpent. So there's all this alienation that's taking place. That's part of the fall. And because, because of the effects of the fall, we all experience difficult things. We just routinely experience sickness and ultimately death. Whatever being a follower of Christ, whatever being a believer, whatever trusting Christ as your Lord and Savior does for you, and it does a lot, it does not make you immortal, at least not this side of the resurrection. So it's very important for us to understand that those sorts of things do, in fact, take place, and we have to be very, very understanding of that. But also, sometimes there are special kinds of situations that happen. There are unique situations where suffering occurs. Suffering also plays a very important role in our character formation. And this is something that I wish there were another way for us to do it, But when Paul says that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, Who does not want to walk around living in the power of the resurrection? I think we all want to do that. But then he says, and the fellowship of his suffering. There's an aspect of suffering that brings us together. As we saw last week, we saw that we are a body and we belong to each other. When one member rejoices, in other words, when one member is joyful, when one member of the body is blessed, we all feel blessed because we all are blessed. So we have that wonderful opportunity to rejoice. And when one member suffers, we all suffer. And we have been praying for folks, and this week, this last several days, Mark Gleason was added to that list. Now, why did that? Sometimes you hear stories about, it's like, Lord, how come there was such bad traffic? And why did it take me so long to get to work this morning? And then the theory is that God says to you, well, I did that because if you'd have been 10 seconds farther down the road, you would have been involved in an accident. Right? Well, that's fine, but Mark was involved in a very bad accident. Why didn't God prevent that? And I don't know the answer to that. There's all kinds. The longer you do this job of being a pastor, the longer you realize you're just not qualified. I wish I could answer all your questions, and I wish I could explain all that, and what I go to seminary for, if not, all that sort of stuff. And the fact is that I can't. God remains, in a very real sense, enigmatic. He's an enigma. He reminds us that He is God and we are not. Right? So He's good. He's good all the time. God is good all the time. All the time God is good. Yes, absolutely. And God works, and we look forward to that time, that day of redemption, the resurrection of the body and redemption. But in the meantime, we are going to suffer. And so we see persecution. Persecution builds up endurance, and endurance builds up patience, and patience gives us hope. So there are a lot of good things, Don't ever ask God for patience, because He'll give it to you, but not as a direct deposit, okay? You're going to have to go through some challenging experiences. Now, there are some things in the Bible that says we can ask God, He'll give it to us. If any of you lack wisdom, right? I think that's probably all of us, right? Ask God, who gives freely and doesn't chide anyone. So, you want wisdom? Pray for wisdom, ask God for wisdom. He'll give it to you. You want patience? Okay? I want to think about that one a little bit. Understand that patience comes to us through the tribulations that we endure. So there's a lot of reasons, and then I guess part of what's implied here is when we suffer, what are we supposed to do with that experience? How are we supposed to benefit from that? And perhaps more importantly for this text this morning, how are we supposed to benefit others? And that's sort of the thing that's going on here. So we're looking at verses 3 through 7 of 2 Corinthians 1. This is an interesting epistle as well. It's not nearly as well known as 1 Corinthians for whatever reason, but it seems as though we don't, as a church, typically know 2 Corinthians as well as we know 1 Corinthians. There are some very challenging passages in this. There are some passages that are difficult to understand. We saw the one where Paul says, I was caught up to I knew a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. I was caught up to the third heaven, heard things which are unlawful to utter. There's all sorts of interesting things, a number of passages that are very familiar from this book, but we've often not read through the whole thing. Well, one of the things that we need to understand is that there are, and I'm going to talk about these in just a couple minutes here, that there are these false apostles. They have come to Corinth, they've followed up on Paul, and they have presented themselves. They have attempted to pass themselves off to the Corinthians as super apostles, right? Not just apostles, but super apostles. Okay? Those of you that ever used to watch Sesame Street with your kids, remember Super Grover? Remember Super Grover? How many of you remember Super Grover? Okay, we got to have a talk. All right, good. Thank you, Grandpa. Appreciate it. Okay, we got to have a talk about this. Okay, but Super Grover, he flies around with a cape and a helmet, and Grover, super apostles, and they pass themselves off to the Corinthians as being so much superior to Paul, who was their founding apostle, to the point where they would say, we have these letters. We have these letters of credentials. Does Paul have those? And they'd say, well, no, I guess he doesn't, because he didn't. Right? Now, Paul will turn that on its head in a little bit. He will say, oh, we have letters. All right, it's you, okay? You are our letters, written with, love, and it's written on your hearts. In other words, you are my credentials, how you have come to know me and come to know Christ and come to be a part of the body of Christ. Also, the super apostles, they didn't spend time in prison. Somebody once said whenever Paul went somewhere, there was either a revival or a riot. Paul always seems to get things stirred up. He always ends up in prison or arrested or beaten, right, and forced out of town. Paul took a job, right? He took a job working in a very sort of mundane type of work, right? Sometimes people that work in ministry have to take other jobs, all right? I think I know what that's about, and I'm sure a lot of you do too as well, right? So in that sense, okay, so how does... Well, we don't need to do that. We don't, Paul worked as the Greek word is skenopoios, which typically translated tent maker. It means somebody who works with leather, like a leather crafter. And that's what they would make their tents out of. And so Paul is this worker in a factory, in a sweatshop, who's often in trouble with the law, who's just going through it. He's got this physical malady, this thorn in the flesh, don't even know what that is. So he's got all these things, and the super apostles came to town and said, well, that's not true of any of us. In fact, we got everything under control. And so they're trying to lure the Corinthians away from their founding apostle to their own teaching. Now, Paul calls these super apostles, he calls them false apostles. He says they're not really real for a variety of reasons. And that's something that's on the back burner really pretty much all the way through this whole epistle, even this beginning section. Let's take a look at these verses. He says in verse 3, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." You heard that expression, pay it forward, right? You've heard that expression. That really started with Paul, or at least with Paul, maybe even before that. "For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ," I don't like that. I don't like that. You don't like it either. "For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer." We here is Paul, for sure. It might be part of his apostolic entourage. We know from the book of Acts, for instance, sometimes we think it was just Paul and Barnabas for one journey walking across, the Mediterranean area, and then 2 more journeys with Silas, and that was it, just the 2 of them. The fact is, there's about 100 different people that are associated with Paul in one way or another, either in the book of Acts or in his epistles. 100, okay? This guy was networked. This guy invented LinkedIn, okay? How many of you know what LinkedIn is? Okay, good. All right, good. A few more than knew the other one that I asked. So this is, before there was the internet, Paul had a network of people that he connected with, and they were very important to him. And he says, if we're comforted, it's for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance. There it is again. You want patience, you want endurance. Guess how it comes? Of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so you also share in our comfort. When we are suffering, when we struggle, God pours out his comforting grace upon us, which then enables us to pour out that same comforting grace on others. So let's take a look at some highlights of this section. Okay, I talked about the super apostles, or as Paul calls them, pseudo or false apostles. 2 Corinthians is in many ways a defense of Paul's ministry. Paul has been put on the defensive by the Corinthians because of these super apostles. All right, they have said some things, and they brought that up. In fact, Paul has heard word. He has heard word what the Corinthians are saying. One of the things, or a thing that he quotes, and there may have been more, one of the things that Paul says in this epistle is, "Oh, I know what you're saying about me." That's always interesting, isn't it? Don't you love it when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I heard this about you"? I hate that, right? Well, it depends on what it is. Tell me what it is. "Oh, that was wonderful." "Oh, good. Tell me more. Apparently the Corinthians were saying, well, you know, Paul's bodily, his epistles are heavy. His epistles are weighty. When he writes a letter, he really goes to town. He really lets us have it. But when he shows up in person, his bodily presence is weak. It's hard to know just how seriously to take that, because that might just be a very biased estimate. It may be that these these super apostles have so convinced these Corinthians that, oh, this is how you preach. And Paul isn't like that. He's more down to earth. We don't know exactly. But we know that they had been convinced or persuaded that Paul was not that impressive a speaker. Now, I think he probably was, but just not in the way that these super apostles were. And if you read some of the literature on the Greek rhetoricians and people like Demosthenes and some of these others, you'll see that this was an art form. And Paul is interested in an art form. He wants to cut to the chase. He wants to just speak right to you. That's what he does. That's what good preachers do. I remember when I was working at Cornerstone, we'd have chapel speakers that would come in every once in a while. And college students are real good with assessing chapel speakers. They decide in about 2 minutes whether you really care about them or whether you're just showing off, Right, Jason, you know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. And it was always interesting to watch, because every once in a great while, I'd see a speaker who was sort of like, oh, this is Tuesday, I must be at Cornerstone University. And they'd go on, and they'd tell these jokes, ha, 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 And the students would just sit there like, it was brutal, okay? It was brutal. But that's the way it is. If we don't think that a speaker really genuinely cares for us, a preacher, someone like that, then, because I know this is cool, this is good, all right? You all really don't care how much I know until you know how much I care. Now, don't misunderstand. There's nothing wrong with knowing stuff. That's vital, that's important. But if all you think I'm here to do is just offer some sort of advanced class that will help you win a Bible trivia game, then I have really blown it. All right? So it's not just about knowing a lot, it's about caring. And so Paul he's defending himself, and he does so in very interesting ways. Remember, Paul has some competition that has come to Corinth. These so-called super apostles, whom Paul refers to as pseudo or false apostles. These guys have convinced the Corinthians that they are the real deal, and they're not that at all. These were individuals who followed up Paul's work and tried to steal his converts. We don't know much about them. Paul is notorious for not specifically identifying his enemies. There's a couple times in the pastoral epistles, Alexander the coppersmith. He was a smith, okay? Hope he was not one of my ancestors, okay? My grandfather was a silversmith, so probably not. But Alexander the coppersmith meant me much harm. May the Lord reward him for, and then he goes on and explains that, all right? So these guys come in and they want to make hay. They want to steal Paul's converts from him. They want to portray Paul in a bad light. One of the aspects of the bad light in which they portray Paul is, boy, this guy he just can't win. He's getting abused. He's getting thrown in prison. He's got this thorn in the flesh, whatever it is. He doesn't have any credentials. He doesn't have a seminary degree or whatever it was, and we do, and so they're trying to steal his church. They claim superiority to Paul. Because look at them. They never got in trouble. They never got thrown in jail. They never got beat up. They didn't have they were flawless, right? They didn't have any thorn in the flesh kinds of issues, right? In Galatia, all right, Paul's critics there tried to add circumcision to the gospel. That is to say, Jewish customs, probably Sabbath observance, circumcision, dietary laws. That's an issue that comes up in Galatians as well. Because Peter, when he goes to Antioch, okay, and he's sort of intimidated into eating with a kosher sort of meal, right? And so he wants nothing then to do with Gentiles. The super apostles at Corinth claimed they had letters of recommendation. This made them, in their minds, more credentialed than Paul, right? How many of you ever seen the movie The Music Man, right? Remember when the four school board guys, right, who made up the old classic barbershop quartet, the Buffalo Bills, they're trying to, that was their name, the Buffalo Bills, okay? They didn't play football, they were a quartet, okay? They were always trying to get Professor Hill's credentials from him, and he would always kind of, get them singing, and they'd slip away, and they never could seem to nail him down. Well, that's what the super apostles were saying about Paul. He didn't have any credentials. We do. Okay? In some, the super apostles thought that they were better than Paul for a variety of reasons. One of which was they did not suffer adversity. They didn't get thrown into jail on a regular basis, so-called. They didn't have all these thorn-in-the-flesh issues. They were better than he. Now, Paul wants us to understand that there's a lot going on here, okay? Paul takes advantage of this situation by saying that not only are the super apostles not superior to Paul, but Paul's humility, his refusal to take support from the Corinthians. This is something that you'll find if you read. Paul would take support from his churches, particularly churches like Philippi. And he said those who preach the gospel should live by the gospel. When he was at Corinth, he didn't take, because the relationship was not good with them. And so he refused any financial support from them. And they said, see? They saw that as a detriment to Paul. Okay? His suffering actually authenticated him. His argument is, my refusal to take anything from you, my humility and my suffering actually authenticate me as an apostle and a follower of Jesus Christ. Now, Paul realizes how tricky this is. Because if I get up here in front of you and I start bragging about how humble I am, right? You see how that kind of self-destroys there? It's called deconstruction. It's called rhetorical deconstruction. If I get up here and tell you how humble I am, I'm so proud of myself because I'm just so humble. See where that goes? So he's being careful here. His ultimate goal is not to alienate the Corinthians. His ultimate goal is to win them back. And so he wants to put himself up as a model. He says in 1 Corinthians 4:14, you be an example of me. You be a follower of me, you Corinthians, as I am of Christ. Again, that's a little risky. I could get up here and say, well, you know what your problem is, folks? You're not like me. Not a good thing to say, okay? Because I'm not an apostle, first of all, as you know that, okay? Paul is the personification of the fact that one can serve Christ, suffer persecution, and that one can thus comfort others. The persecution and the suffering that you and I will endure, whether it's physical suffering, whatever it is a means by which we can be better prepared to serve God and to serve others. This is a pay-it-forward thing. So when you suffer, right, and you are comforted by God during that time of suffering, then you can, in turn, comfort others in the same fashion. Right? So, let's look at just some highlights from this text, and then we'll wrap things up today. First of all, Paul makes it clear who God is. God is the Father of all compassion and the God of all comfort. So we can start there. I would say to Jerry and Terry Gleason and the family, I would say, don't forget that God is the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. I would say that to Bob and Barb Four. I would say that to Betty Race. I would say that to any number of you that have had loved ones who have struggled with health issues or others. Or you wonder, why did this happen? Why my son or daughter was trying to serve you and yet you let this happen to them? Right? We must never forget that God is the Father of all compassion and the God of all comfort. Did any of us have any idea? I know I didn't. Did any of us have any idea what 2020 would be like? I don't think we did. One of the things that happened with us, as you know, is that Cornerstone University said, we're concerned about a financial hit that COVID is going to give to us. And it has been there. It's not been as bad as it could have been, but we're concerned about that. And so what they did was they said, let's look at who's up for potentially retiring, and we'll offer them an incentivized early retirement. Now, the reason for this is they can, A, streamline, right, their faculty, which is good, okay? They might also eventually hire someone else to fill my position, and then they can, because of the way it goes, they can pay them less. And that's perfectly fine. I don't begrudge them that in the least. But I can tell you that, I didn't see this coming. I did not see this coming. And you probably didn't see it coming either. But is God still good? Oh my goodness. The opportunities to speak, to share Christ, to bless others, to work in areas I never thought I would ever work. There is so much good that has come out of this. It's the last thing I expected. It's the last thing I expected. And quite frankly, it's kind of the last thing I wanted. I remember having a Zoom. That's what made it even worse. You're having a Zoom call with your boss, And I just said, it's going to turn out that when I walked out of class on March 12, 2020, and I had no idea that was the last day I would ever teach a class as a full-time professor. It's one thing to know it's coming, right? It's one thing to have a few days or weeks or months to prepare. It's quite another thing when they say, yeah, what you did 2 or 3 months ago, that's it. That's going to be it if you take this offer. Now, I don't begrudge. Please understand, I'm not criticizing in any way. Cornerstone was extremely generous with me, and I appreciate that. I have nothing ill to say at all. I just know that God said, it's time. Okay. I got to my first day of subbing, and they said, oh, by the way, at the end of each hour, you have the kids get up from their desks, stand by the door, and you take this spray bottle, and you take this paper towel and these gloves, and you spray down and wipe down all their desks. Really? Do you know who I am? And they said, evidently, we don't. Okay. Yeah, we do. You're a preferred sub, and this is part of your job. Get to it. And then it's like I heard the Lord whispering in my ear, what did I say about if you want to be the greatest? You be the servant of everybody. Thanks a lot, okay? Now that's my story. You all could tell the same story or a similar story in where you have gone through these challenges, okay? God, don't ever forget, don't ever, ever, ever forget, God is the Father of all compassion and the God of comfort, despite all the trials and tribulations that you and I have experienced. Okay? It's important that we realize that God is first and foremost a God who shows us compassion and affords us comfort. It's not like God just took a day off, or God said, like you and I, when we get those emails or those letters, and then you say, hey, by the way, did you get my email a month ago? Oh, yeah, I did. I'm sorry. I just completely forgot. God doesn't forget. He just does what he does when he does, and he has a reason for it. Okay? Our circumstances never rise above who God is. All right? Our circumstances never rise above who God is. Nothing catches God by surprise. Caught me by surprise, probably caught you by surprise. Didn't catch God by surprise. Our trials and tribulations never rise to the level of countering or canceling out God's compassion and comfort. That is so very important. God has not changed. Your life has changed drastically. It will eventually go back to a normal, but it will not be the same normal that you had before. By the way, if you didn't see the little video I put up on the Forest Hills, sorry, that's flashback. That's previous church, okay? First Baptist Church ABC website, talking about how the diaconate are going to be talking to you, because as we think about opening up a bit more and a bit more as time goes by, we want to go back to more of a normal kind of thing. But what is that new normal going to be? And the diaconate folks are going to talk to you about that. Feel free to seek them out and talk to them as well if you have any ideas about that. All right? Second, the comfort that we receive from God during our own troubles enables us to comfort others with that same comfort. That's why I said pay it forward. So you and I, we go through the times of trouble and trial, and we look and we say, we know that God has not changed. We know that God is the God of all comfort. We know that God is the God of all encouragement. God is still very much there for us, but we just don't understand. The other thing is we need to know not only that that's nice. I mean, I can sit there and be comforted. Oh, I like being comforted. Don't you like being comforted? I love a nice soft pillow when I lay down in bed. I like that. I like that a lot. I like a nice comfortable couch to take a nap on, all right? I like comfort food. I got to stop doing that. Summer's coming, okay? I got to start, my COVID. I know what COVID-19 means. It means COVID-19 right here, okay? 20, 22, maybe, I don't know, okay? That's just here, okay? I'm working on it, okay? I'm working on it. The comfort that we receive, then, we are to pass on to others. We are to it's not that I just sit there and soak up, oh, that's so wonderful. God comforted me. Yeah, it is wonderful. But I now have the opportunity to comfort others. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to reach out to them in love and comfort. It is crucial that we realize that even in our own trials and tribulations, and make no mistake, your own trials and tribulations are very real. I just have the luxury of getting in front of you and talking about mine, okay? You can't do that, but you can talk among yourselves and so forth, and you can share your stories with me. We are ultimately not just being comforted ourselves, but we are to comfort others. We got to pay it forward. So when God is a comfort to you and when God encourages you, that gives you an opportunity to comfort others. They always used to tell us in seminary, be very, very careful about, when someone, you find out that someone tragically lost their spouse in an accident. Don't walk up to them and say, oh yeah, I know what you're going through. No, you don't, okay? Don't do that, right? Just realize that you're there to comfort them with what you do know and what God has blessed you with. But don't, just be very careful. But the fact is, we are there to share this with others. We belong to each other as members of one body. We look out for each other. At least we are supposed to, right? So that's what we're called to do. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's always about someone else, okay? Others whom we can reach out to. Finally, and I just decided to just put this passage up on the screen as the third point and just make a couple quick comments about this, and we'll wrap it up, okay? He says in verses 5 through 7, just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. You can't pick and choose. Following Christ is not a smorgasbord. It's not a breakfast brunch buffet. Oh, I like this, I like that, I like that. What about the suffering? Oh, I don't want that. I don't like that. I like the good stuff. I take the good stuff. That's what I want. No, it's not a buffet. It is what God has given to us. We share abundantly the sufferings of Christ. Now again, I think he's talking about himself as an apostle and those that are with him. He says, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. I don't know, in all candor, how people who don't know the Lord really go through some of the things that we go through. I really don't. That should be an incentive for you to share the good news of Christ with neighbors and friends and fellow workers and all that sort of thing. If we are distressed, Paul says, if we apostles, Paul is your founding apostle, if we're distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. In other words, the lessons that you and I learn, we can pass on to others. And that's a very important thing to do. And our hope for you is firm because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so also you share in our comfort. If you never ever go through suffering, I would be honest, I'd worry about you. Because there are things that only suffering can teach you. I was talking to Linda briefly this morning about Gary. Gary's doing well, right? Yeah. But you, go ahead. Can I tell a story? Sure. And I didn't get permission to tell this because, oh boy. I need to tell a little story. Go ahead. You can tell it, and then we'll close in prayer.
I didn't get Gary's permission to tell this, and I probably should, but
I'm telling on you.
I'll tell him when I get home.
Yeah.
When Gary was in the hospital suffering, and he didn't even tell me till probably a month after he got home, and he made me sit. He told me to come and sit next to him on the bed, and I thought, oh no, what's going on? He was visited. And he said it was the bluest blue and the greenest green, and Jesus, he said, are you taking me home? And he said, no, I'm here to comfort you and help you through this. And it was, Gary said, he just said, and I want him to be able to tell you the whole story, but it's just like, wow. And it was an experience for Gary. And he needs to tell you the whole story, but it was like, wow, you're speaking to me this morning. And Gary really wants to tell this story, but as you know, he can't be here. But it was like that. He still thinks about that, and he just says, and Gary suffered, and Gary said, it was the worst pain he's ever had in his life, and he really, really laid in his hospital bed, and he said he really thought Jesus was coming to take him home, and what Jesus told him was, no, I'm here to help you through this. So
Yeah.
I had to share that.
That was not planned, by the way, as you probably figured out. But again, that's just one, and I'm sure that every one of us can tell that story. You know, we followed Gary's story. If you remember when we first heard that there was a liver that he could be transplanted with, and they got there for the surgery, and it was not viable. Right back to square one again. But eventually God did provide for him. We had the chance to go down and visit. This is what it means to be comforted by the comfort with which God ourselves comfort us, so that we can then be comforted, be comforting others. That's what that means, the God of all comfort and the God of all hope. And this is what he does for us, that we can share these things. It's not evidence that God has abandoned us. It is an assurance that when we go through our difficult and challenging times, that God is always with us. Thank you so much for your patience this morning. Let me close this in prayer. Lord, thank you for just the amazing grace that you give to us. Even the most challenging and painful and difficult times, you are there with us as the God of all comfort. And just as